She had been folding her mother's clothes for 3 hours before she found it. Not a letter. Not a photograph. A birth certificate. Creased down the middle like someone had folded it in half and pressed it flat under something heavy, something meant to keep it from ever opening again. The name on it was not hers. The mother's name was. Lorraine Adeyemi had spent the morning the way she always spent mornings after loss, with her hands. Sorting, folding, discarding. It was easier than thinking. Easier than remembering the way her mother's voice had sounded on the phone 3 weeks before she died, that strange careful quality, like she was choosing every word from a list she'd rehearsed. Lorraine had told herself her mother was just tired. She told herself a lot of things. The bedroom smelled like lavender and old wood. It always had. Her mother, Grace, had kept dried lavender in small cloth sachets tucked into every drawer, every shelf, every corner of the house on Birch Lane where Lorraine had grown up. Lorraine had never thought to ask why. Some things about your parents you just accept, the way you accept the color of the walls or the particular way light falls through the kitchen window at 4 in the afternoon. You stop seeing them. You stop asking. She sat down on the edge of the bed. The name on the birth certificate was Adana. Adana Okafor. Born in May, 11 years before Lorraine. The mother listed was Grace Adeyemi. The father field was blank. Lorraine read it 3 times. Then she read it again. The paper was old but not ancient, it had that particular yellowed quality of something that had been kept in a drawer rather than in the light. Someone had cared for it. Someone had kept it on purpose. She set it down on the quilt. She picked it up. She set it down again. Her mother had been 18 when Adana was born. 18, unmarried, and living in a time and a place where that particular combination carried consequences that followed a woman for life. Lorraine knew her mother's history in the way you know a story you've been told, the broad strokes, the version with the good lighting. Grace had grown up in the East, moved west at 20, met Lorraine's father at 22, married him at 23. That was the story. That was the whole story. Except it wasn't. She tried to call her brother first. Emeka didn't pick up. She tried again. Still nothing. She thought about calling the lawyer, a dry-voiced woman named Margaret Solar who had read the will to them last Thursday in a room that smelled like carpet and formality. But Margaret Solar had not mentioned a name like Adana. Margaret Solar had simply distributed what Grace had left, which was this house, a modest savings account, and a collection of ceramic birds that Lorraine had always privately found unsettling. There was nothing in the will about another daughter. Which meant one of 2 things. Either this child, this woman, now, she would be in her 50s, had never been found. Or she had been found, and Grace had decided, in the particular quiet way Grace decided everything, to keep her separate. To keep her away. To fold her in half and press her flat and hope the crease would hold. Lorraine walked downstairs. The house felt different now. Not bigger, exactly, but less familiar. Like a room you've been in 100 times suddenly showing you a door you hadn't noticed. She made tea she didn't drink. She thought about her mother's hands. The way Grace would go still sometimes in the middle of a conversation, not absent-minded but watchful, like she was listening for something beneath the words. Lorraine had always thought it was grief. Her father had died when Lorraine was 7, and some part of Grace had never entirely returned from that. But maybe it had been something older. Maybe it had been a listening she'd been doing her whole life. The front doorbell rang at 2:30. Lorraine almost didn't answer it. She was still sitting at the kitchen table with the birth certificate and her cold cup of tea and the particular weight of a morning that had rewritten itself. But the bell rang again. Then a knock. The woman on the porch was tall. She had Grace's eyes, that specific shade of deep brown that caught light in a way that looked almost amber in certain angles, and she was holding a small envelope in both hands the way you hold something you've been carrying for a long time and are finally ready to put down. She said, "I think you know who I am." Lorraine did not know who she was. And then, slowly, she did. Her name was Adana Okafor. She was 53 years old. She had driven for hours that morning from a city, she said carefully, precisely, like she wanted Lorraine to know she had her own life, her own place, her own coordinates in the world that had nothing to do with this house on Birch Lane. She had found out about Grace 6 weeks ago, she said. She had written a letter. She had waited. And then Grace had died before the letter could do whatever the letter was supposed to do. They stood in the hallway, Lorraine and this woman who shared her mother's eyes, and neither of them sat down. The envelope, Adana said, was from Grace. It had arrived the day before Lorraine called the lawyer. It was addressed not to Adana's current name but to a name from childhood, a nickname that only one person alive could have known. Which meant Grace had known where she was. Had known for some time. Had known, and had still not said a word to Lorraine. Had still stood in this kitchen and folded lavender sachets and asked Lorraine about her job and her apartment and whether she was eating enough. Had done all of that while carrying a daughter Lorraine never knew existed. What did the letter say? Lorraine asked. Adana looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that means the person is deciding how much of the truth you can hold. It said she was sorry, Adana told her. It said she had been sorry for 53 years. It said that she had wanted to reach out 100 times and had talked herself out of it every single time because she was afraid of what it would do to the life she had built. To you, Adana said. She was afraid of what it would do to you. Lorraine heard that and felt something move through her that she could not name. Not anger, exactly. Not grief. Something in between. Something that didn't have a word yet. She had a sister. She had always had a sister. And her mother had kept that fact folded and pressed and tucked in a drawer, the same way she kept everything she couldn't bear to look at directly, with lavender sachets and careful hands and a silence that Lorraine had spent her whole life mistaking for peace. She didn't ask Adana to leave. She didn't ask her to stay. She stood in the hallway of her mother's house and she looked at this woman's eyes, Grace's eyes, her eyes, and she thought about all the Sundays she had sat at this table. All the times she had thought she knew this house. All the rooms she had never known to look for. Then she stepped back from the door. And she let her in. Which should have been the end of something. But it was only the beginning. Because what Adana had not yet told her, what was still inside that small envelope, written in Grace's careful slanted handwriting on the last page of the letter, was the reason she had never come forward. The reason she had stayed away for 53 years. The reason a woman as stubborn and loving and fundamentally decent as Grace Adeyemi had chosen silence over everything. It was not shame. It was a name. A name Lorraine recognized. A name she had known her entire life, one smooth with use, like a stone you've carried in your pocket so long you forget it's there. The name of her father.